For 30 years, I wore the same tailored suits, carried the same leather briefcase, walked the same glass halls of a Manhattan law firm. I thought I'd made it. But 6 months after my wife died, I found myself sitting on a park bench, holding a broken doll I'd just pulled out of a puddle. That moment, quiet, absurd, and strangely human, changed everything. This isn't a story about giving up. It's about finally seeing what needed fixing. I was a senior partner at one of the top law firms in New York City, 40 floors up, floor-to-ceiling glass, a skyline that never blinked. I had a corner office and a view most people would kill for. My name was on the door. I managed billion-dollar clients, made 7 figures a year, and shook hands with people who moved markets. On paper, it was a life of prestige, power, and control. I wore tailored suits, carried a briefcase that had its own seat on a private jet, and got invited to rooms where people whispered and decisions got made. I built that life piece by piece, and for decades I believed I had done it right. I was respected, I was needed, but I wasn't whole, and I didn't know it yet. Every day was booked to the minute. Breakfast with a client, flight to D.C. for a hearing, back in time for a late dinner with partners. I lived on red-eye flights, $200 scotch, and carefully managed stress. I had a watch I never looked at because my time wasn't mine. I measured success in hours billed and awards collected. I kept a folder in my desk of every big win, every case closed, every glowing email from a powerful name. My calendar was full for the next 6 months. I told myself that was a good thing. Busy meant important. Important meant successful. But what I couldn't admit, what I didn't even let myself feel, was that success had become a kind of armor, and I was starting to forget who I was without it. Elaine and I met in our 20s. She was warm, funny, and quick to laugh at the things I took too seriously. We got married before the promotions, before the boardrooms, back when dinner was cheap. Takeout on a second-hand couch. For a while, we were a team. But as the firm grew, so did the distance between us. She used to joke that I managed our marriage like a merger, efficient, well-organized, but a little impersonal. And she was right. I loved her. I just didn't show up the way she needed. I gave her stability, a nice apartment, vacations twice a year, but not much of myself. Somewhere along the line, our conversations turned into scheduling logistics, and the silence between us started. We were still a couple on paper, 2 names on the lease, 2 people at the same holiday dinners, but emotionally, we were living parallel lives. She filled her days with books, causes, and a small circle of friends. I filled mine with clients, cases, and long calls that always seemed to go past dinner. We weren't angry. We weren't even fighting. We were just drifting. And then one day, she sat me down, her voice calm but tired, and said she'd found a lump. I nodded, offered to rearrange my travel schedule, and promised we'd get through it. But I had no idea how. I think part of me believed I could manage her illness the same way I managed a crisis at work, efficiently, from a distance. But cancer doesn't do scheduling. Elaine's decline wasn't dramatic. It was slow, quiet, and terribly polite. She didn't want to be a burden. She never asked for more than I could give. I was there. I paid for the best doctors. I took calls from the hospital. But I wasn't present. Not the way she needed. Not really. The night she passed, I was sitting beside her, watching the heart monitor instead of her face. I remember the flatline sound more clearly than her last words. And then the silence. Not just in the room, but in my life. I went back to work a week later. Everyone was kind, in a distant corporate way. "Take your time," they said, then handed me a file. No one asked if I was okay, and the truth is, I didn't either. I just kept moving, because stopping meant feeling. I'd sit in meetings about international mergers and feel like I was floating outside my own body. I could still talk about tax exposure and regulatory frameworks, but my voice felt disconnected, like I was hearing someone else. Nothing felt real, but everything looked normal. My tie was straight. My slides were polished. My signature still meant something to someone, somewhere. But inside, I was hollow. I'd catch myself staring at the edge of the conference table, wondering how I got there. Not just in the room, but in my life. Grief doesn't always look like crying. Sometimes it's just silence. A silence no one else notices because you've gotten so good at pretending. I smiled in elevators. I hit deadlines. I made deals that made other people rich. But at night, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, wide awake, asking myself the same question over and over. What have I actually done with my life? I didn't mean the cases or the money. I meant meaning, legacy. I'd spent decades building a reputation, but I couldn't name a single moment that felt real. I thought competence would be enough, that if I was good at my job, the rest would follow. But I had no one left to share anything with. No audience, no echo, just the sound of my own thoughts, too loud in a quiet room. The apartment felt colder than it used to, not physically, but emotionally, like someone had taken the soul out of it. The kitchen was too clean, the closets too neat. I started eating dinner on the couch with the TV on just to hear voices. I'd open cabinets just to close them again. Bookshelves lined with awards and first editions stared back at me, and I realized they meant nothing without someone to say, "You should be proud." I wasn't proud. I was just tired. There were whole days I didn't speak out loud. No one noticed. The phone didn't ring. The silence had grown roots, and for the first time, I wasn't sure I could outrun it. It was a gray, wet morning. I'd left the office early. No meetings, no reason to stay. As I crossed 58th Street, I saw something odd on the sidewalk. A broken doll. It was soaked, missing a leg, and lying face down like it had been stepped on a dozen times. I should have ignored it. Everyone else did. But something about it stopped me. Maybe it was how discarded it looked, or maybe I just saw myself in it. I picked it up, carried it home in my briefcase, didn't tell anyone. That night, I put it on the table and just stared at it. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning. I didn't know how to sew. I Googled it, sat there with a needle and thread, fumbling like a kid, and somehow managed to reattach the doll's leg. It looked ridiculous, crooked, and mismatched, but it held. I wiped the dirt off her dress and brushed her hair with an old toothbrush. Then I set her on the windowsill, next to a plant that had been dying for months. She looked out over the city like she belonged there. It was the first thing I'd fixed in years, and it didn't feel small. It felt like I'd saved something, or maybe like something in me had shifted, just a little. A week later, I saw another toy, a plastic truck, scratched and missing a wheel. I picked that up too, took it home, cleaned it, found a way to rig the wheel with parts from an old pen. It worked. That became a pattern. Every Saturday, I'd go for a walk and keep my eyes on the ground, and most weekends, I'd come home with something broken. Not always toys. Once it was a music box, once a torn backpack strap, but I'd sit at the kitchen table and figure it out. I wasn't doing it for anyone. I wasn't even sure why I was doing it at all, but it felt quiet and needed. Eventually, I stopped bringing the toys home. I'd sit on a bench near the bus stop instead, toolkit beside me, a few small items in my lap. There was no grand idea behind it, no charity, no mission, just me and my hands and whatever needed mending that day. The rhythm of it felt sacred, quiet, focused, patient. I didn't talk much. I didn't have to. People passed by, glanced, kept walking. Some smiled, some didn't. I didn't care. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was welcome. Like I'd found a small pocket of peace in a city that never stops moving. It felt like the first honest time I'd had in years. It began with a little girl who'd been watching me from the bus stop. She walked over and held out her teddy bear. One eye missing, arm loose. "Can you fix him?" she asked. I nodded. Then her brother came with a toy robot whose legs didn't move. Then a mother with a porcelain doll from her own childhood. I didn't advertise. I didn't ask. They just came. Word spread slowly. Parents started bringing broken toys, sitting on the bench next to me while they waited for their bus. We didn't talk much, but they looked at me like I wasn't just repairing plastic and thread, and maybe, in some quiet way, I wasn't. I wasn't trained in any of this. I didn't grow up building models or sewing clothes. I watched YouTube tutorials. I improvised. I used fishing line for stitching, super glue for joints, paper clips for missing parts. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But I started to care, not about perfection, but about the stories people told when they handed me the toy. She's had this bear since she was born. It was the last thing his father gave him. I kept this doll through every move I ever made. These weren't just toys. They were memories. And somehow, fixing them felt like honoring something sacred. One Saturday, a man in a tailored coat stopped in front of me. He looked familiar. "Thomas," he said. "From Barkley and James." I nodded. He looked at the screwdriver in my hand, then at the toy car on my knee. "What the hell are you doing out here?" I smiled and shrugged. "Honestly? Healing?" He laughed awkwardly and walked away. But I wasn't embarrassed. Not even a little. I used to be the guy behind the desk, giving closing statements. Now I was the guy with a dented toolbox, fixing wheels and reattaching arms. And weirdly, that version of me felt more real than anything I'd ever been in a courtroom. There was a moment, early on, when I caught a glimpse of myself in a store window, bent over, gray-haired, threading a needle through a ragged toy. And I thought, is this pathetic? A grown man sitting at a bus stop, fixing dolls like it means something? The shame hit me hard. But then came something else, relief. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing admiration. I wasn't proving anything. I wasn't even hiding. I was just doing something that felt honest. The relief of that almost knocked the wind out of me. Turns out, when you stop needing to be impressive, you finally get to be real. Someone snapped a photo and posted it online. A man with a tie, fixing a stuffed elephant under a cloudy sky. It went viral. A local paper did a story. Then a blog. Then someone filmed a short video. Strangers started calling me the toy bench lawyer. At first, I cringed. I didn't want attention. I didn't want to be a story. But I saw the comments. This made me cry. I wish my kid had someone like him nearby. My dad was like this, quiet, kind. And I realized maybe it wasn't about me at all. Maybe people just needed to see something tender in a world that doesn't always make space for that. One afternoon, I found an envelope tucked into the side of my toolbox. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note from a man who had lost his daughter. He said, watching a video of me fixing toys made him cry for the first time in 5 years. After that, the letters started coming regularly. Emails, cards, scribbled notes. People didn't write about toys. They wrote about grief, about Marriages that drifted, children they couldn't reach, parents they never forgave. They said the bench reminded them of something they'd forgotten, that gentleness still exists. Somehow, through glue and thread, I'd started listening to people I'd never met. And they listened back. The children who came often didn't just drop off toys, they stayed. They'd sit beside me, swinging their legs and talk about their teachers, their baby siblings, their dreams of becoming astronauts or chefs or dragon tamers. They told me about the fights at home, about moms who were too tired, and dads who were gone. At first, I didn't know what to say. I tried giving advice, but eventually I learned what they needed wasn't answers, just space, a lap to sit near, a presence that said, "I'm here, you matter." Listening like that changed me. It wasn't courtroom sharpness. It was something slower, softer, something I never knew I needed to learn. Not every toy could be saved. Some came to me melted, rusted, torn in ways that no amount of thread or glue could help. I'd try. I always tried. But sometimes I had to look up at the child and say, "I'm sorry. I can't fix this one." I braced for tears, for disappointment. But what I got, more often than not, was grace. "Thanks for trying," they'd say, or just a quiet nod before walking away. It floored me. Their acceptance, their capacity for loss, without bitterness. It made me wonder how many adults could learn from that. I know I did. I still do. One evening, after a long day on the bench, I opened an old notebook. I hadn't written anything personal since college, back when I thought I might become a poet instead of a partner. That night, I wrote about a toy duck with a missing eye, and the girl who had hugged it so tight. I kept going. Pages filled with fragments, memories of my wife, lines of conversation, pieces of my own silence. It wasn't for anyone else, just a place where my hands could still move, even when my heart felt still. Writing didn't save me, but it helped me notice what was worth saving. Turns out I was good with my hands. Not in the way my resume used to boast, not in legal briefs or closing statements, but in a slower, more honest way. Sewing, sanding, fitting things back together. I used to think my value lived in my mind, in the way I could out-argue, out-negotiate, outwork anyone in the room. But here I was, decades later, learning that quiet work that didn't impress, didn't dazzle, was the kind that nourished something deeper. My hands remembered what my head forgot, that being useful doesn't mean being praised. It just means being present. I used to think legacy meant buildings named after you, endowments, honors, a corner office that stays quiet after you've gone. Now I think it's something smaller. It's the way a child looks at you when you hand them something that was broken and now isn't. It's the mother who says thank you with tears in her eyes, not because the toy is new, but because someone cared enough to try. It's the moments no one sees and the stories no one will write down. That's the legacy I never planned for, and somehow the only one I ever wanted. If I could talk to Elaine now, I'd tell her I'm sorry. Not just for the long hours or the missed dinners, but for the deeper thing, believing that providing was the same as loving, that keeping the lights on mattered more than looking her in the eyes. She never asked for anything grand, just time, just presence. I used to think I was doing it all for us, but the truth is, I was doing it for my own pride, and I'd give anything to sit across from her again, to put down my phone, to ask about her day. I can't. But I can try to be present now, in the quiet, in the small, in the mending of things I once thought unimportant. Every Saturday, I pack up my old wooden toolbox and head to that bus stop bench. Doesn't matter if it's cold or raining or if no one shows up. I go, not for the toys, not for the kids, even though I love them, but because it feels like church, a ritual, a moment outside of time. There's a stillness to it, a rhythm, the sound of thread pulling through fabric, the way a child's voice lifts when something is fixed. That bench has become a kind of altar, not to success or redemption or any grand idea, just to showing up, to doing one small thing with care, again and again. A young lawyer passed by once, mid-20s, polished, exhausted. He recognized me, and we talked for a while. He was chasing the same life I once had. At the end, he noticed the old leather briefcase beside me and asked about it. I told him I'd carried it for 30 years, through depositions, mergers, trials. Then I handed it to him. Empty. Just like it always was, in the ways that mattered. He looked confused, even honored. I don't know if he understood what I was giving him. Not a tool, but a mirror. Sometimes you need to feel the weight of something before you realize it was never what you needed. When I was younger, I moved fast. Faster than everyone else. That was the goal? Get ahead. Stay ahead. I didn't even know what I was rushing toward. Now I spend hours reattaching a single plastic limb, matching thread to faded cloth. It's slow, deliberate. There's no shortcut, no trick. And it's in that slowness I finally found something resembling peace. No one tells you this when you're young. Doing one thing slowly, with care, is worth more than doing 1,000 things fast. The world moves quickly, but healing needs stillness, patience, 2 hands, a little time. I really thought I would. The corner office, the endless phone calls, the constant sense of being needed. But I don't. Not even a little. That version of usefulness was always just performance. This quiet work, this listening, this patching up what others might throw away. It feels real. No bonuses, no applause, just a child's smile. A thank you whispered by someone who didn't think anyone cared. I finally feel useful in a way that makes sense to me. Not profitable, not strategic, just human. And somehow, that's enough. Maybe it always was. I wish I'd known earlier that it's okay to start again, not from a mapped-out plan, but from a quiet ache, from a sense that something inside you isn't finished yet. We're told that reinvention comes from ambition, reinvention seminars, 5-point plans. But for me, it came from sitting on a bench with nothing but my hands and an old doll. I didn't need more goals. I needed grace. I needed to be kind to myself, to let myself be a beginner again. If I'd known that sooner, I might have wasted less time trying to be right and spent more time trying to be whole. One day, I know I'll fix my last toy. My hands will shake. My eyes won't see so well. Maybe my thread will snap one too many times, and that'll be it. The bench will stay empty. The box will be closed. But until that day comes, I'll be right here, stitching, listening, trying. Because in fixing these small, forgotten things, I've been quietly piecing myself back together too. Not all at once, not perfectly, but honestly. And maybe, just maybe, that's what healing really is. Not being new again, just being willing to keep going, one stitch at a time. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. We all break. Sometimes a little, sometimes completely. But fixing things, no matter how small, is how we remember we're not beyond repair. Before you go, if this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of something you've lost or something you're slowly trying to mend, consider subscribing. These aren't just stories. They're quiet truths told in a loud world. And I'd love to hear yours. What's something simple that helped you through something hard? Have you ever started over, not with a plan, but with a feeling? Leave a comment. Like the video if it meant something to you. And if you haven't seen it yet, my last story might speak to you too, about a former pastor who stopped preaching and started listening. Sometimes silence says more than words.